I would like to introduce my friend Harvey Wasserman. He's a senior advisor to Greenpeace and to the Nuclear Information and Resource Service. He's the author or co-author of 6 books, including 4 on nuclear power and renewable energy, and 2 histories of the United States. After graduating from the University of Michigan in 1967, Harvey helped found the legendary anti-war, what was that? Okay, the Anti-War Liberation News Service. Harvey helped coin the phrase, and boy, why didn't you copyright this? No nukes. And in 1976, he helped organize, and this is how I began to hear his name as one of the gurus of the anti-nuclear movement in the 70s. He helped organize the first mass demonstrations against Seabrook, which is another bad performer in New Hampshire, another nuclear plant. In '79, he co-organized the Musicians United for Safe Energy concerts in Madison Square Garden. In 1994, on Greenpeace's behalf, 1994, he spoke to 350,000 semi-conscious fans at Woodstock 2. Hey, this is off of his PR stuff. So. He moved back to Central Ohio in the mid-1980s, fortunately for Ohio. He has helped organize a number of successful campaigns against a regional radioactive waste dump, Columbus's now shut down trash-burning power plant, and the now defunct McDonald's in Bexley, Ohio. I'm not for BG, but I think you ought to give a BG welcome to Harvey.
Hi everybody. That was great. Two great performances. I was just, is anybody down at Farm Aid in Columbus this weekend? All right. We had the first ever Farm Aid in Ohio this weekend. It was sold out. And all those rumors you've heard about Neil Young are really true. It was spectacular, and I hope we'll come back to Ohio again. I got involved in this anti-nuclear stuff in the early 1970s. I was peacefully living on one of those hippie farms in western Massachusetts. And I'm sure many of you have heard all these rumors about the drugs and the sex and the rock and roll, and all those communes. And I'm here to tell you that every rumor you ever heard is absolutely true. And it was a phenomenal experience. It was the Jimi Hendrix experience, actually. But I came out of it okay. I have 5 daughters. I live in Columbus, Ohio. And I went to that school up north. Indeed, I did, at the University of Michigan. I graduated in 1967. I'll tell you a quick story. We were living on this farm in Massachusetts. We were refugees from the anti-war movement. I got to tell you, by the way, that our farm was one of the first to go organic. We stopped using chemicals. We used a lot of chemicals on ourselves, but we didn't put it on our food. And we were just kind of grooving along there. In 1973, the local utility company came in and said they were going to build a nuclear plant 4 miles from our house. And I was quite thrilled, actually. We were getting a little bored. You know, the war was winding down. That's the Vietnam War. By the way, I'm here to ask you for $89 billion to rebuild Iraq. We will be taking a correction up afterwards. So. They need a school system. Anyway, when the nuke came in, I was thrilled because I knew that this was, I knew all about nuclear power in 1973 because I'd done a report on it in 9th grade at Roosevelt Junior High in Columbus. So I was the resident expert, and at the time I was actually pro-nuclear. I always say that I was pro-nuclear. I don't point out that it was in 9th grade, but nonetheless, I got all my information, by the way, from Walt Disney's Our Friend the Atom, which I got from my bar mitzvah, and it was very easy to do the report. So, you know, when this nuke came into town, I just had this feeling, you know, that we were going to stop it. And I got to tell you, you know, I learned this in the late 60s. I went to the University of Michigan. I was going to be a history professor. I got a fellowship to go to the University of Chicago and all this stuff. But towards the end, as the war heated up, I was going to teach American history as a professor at some university like Bowling Green and play tennis every day. And, are you allowed to play tennis if you get tenure? Is that part of it? And anyway, and suddenly I realized in the late 60s that it was a lot more fun to make history than to teach it. And I hope that that's the lesson you'll come out of here tonight, because you're going to be hearing from the guy who's made more history than just about anybody else in the history of the United States, which is Ralph Nader. So when we had our chance, and I met Ralph Nader when this nuke came into town, because he was one of the very first to understand that nuclear power was crazy. And so he held these 2 conferences in Washington, the critical mass energy conferences, where those of us who were on hippie farms dealing with nuclear power plants could come to Washington and find out what was really going on. And that's really where I learned whatever it is I knew and then have since forgotten. So when they came into our town, yes, I did in fact coin the phrase "no nukes." I mean, somebody was going to. It's all 7 letters, but since we were early, I got it. I tried to copyright it, but they laughed at me. And we just organized and we stopped this thing. We were just a bunch of hippies on the hill. They said, no, you're never going to make a dent in this thing. The town wanted it. We held a referendum. The town was 75% in favor of building this nuclear plant on the Montague Plains, but we took that as a great sign, because we had suddenly rose to 25% of the town against it. And you know, when 3,000 people voted and 770 voted against a nuclear power plant in 1974, we thought, hey, we got a base to work from. And we did. And we organized, we pressure grouped, we did all this stuff. We started our own organizations. Ours was called the Alternative Energy Coalition, or the AEC, and we just kicked them right out of town. We beat them. And the place where they were going to build this nuclear plant is now a nature conservancy. It was never touched. The bulldozers never came in. So then, working experience, you can't top that. So then I started, there was another nuclear plant being built in Seabrook, New Hampshire, and we went up there and organized all these great rallies, and we learned from the Quakers how to be nonviolent, which is very important. And those of you who are interested in being activists as a full or part-time non-paying job, have to know that nonviolence is really part of it. You can't mess with violence in the nuclear issue anyway, and in this case, nonviolence has been extremely effective and very, very essential. In fact, we have gone through, well, it's now 30 years almost of demonstrations where we've had hundreds and hundreds of demonstrations involving thousands of people being arrested, and to my knowledge, no one has been killed in the anti-nuclear movement in this country except Karen Silkwood, who was run off the road by, well, we won't go into that, but if you just see the movie Silkwood. And, but it's unprecedented in American history to have a social movement of this size, this magnitude, and this duration to have no fatalities. And it speaks to the power, because in 1974, we were just getting started, Richard Nixon, who I believe is George W. Bush's illegitimate father, except he wasn't a Nazi. Let me tell you about Prescott Bush, by the way. Later on, we'll talk about Prescott Bush. He's one of the very few Americans indicted under the Trading with the Enemies Act in 1942 after the World War II broke out. Those of you studying history need to learn that. But at any rate, in 1974, Richard Nixon got on national television and said there will be 1,000 nuclear power plants in the United States by the year 2000. That means a state like Ohio would have had 20, 30, you know, about around that area, okay? 1,000 by the year 2000. It's now 2003. You know how many nukes there were in the United States in the year 2000? About 108. Somewhere between 104 and 108. We're down to 103. They maxed out at about 120. They would have had 1,000 nuclear power plants in this country if we hadn't gone out and organized and demonstrated and marched. You would have never heard about the accident at 3 Mile Island had it not been for the demonstrations at Seabrook and Diablo Canyon and all the other nuclear plants in the late 70s. In fact, when the accident happened at 3 Mile Island, all the newscasters were calling us to try and figure out what happened. They didn't have no idea what was going on. They all had to run and see the China Syndrome with Jane Fonda, which came out exactly at the same time. There's still people who think that the movie Promotion Company caused the accident. In fact, Edward Teller, who just passed away, in fact, he blamed Jane Fonda for giving him high blood pressure at the time. He said it was for other reasons. Anyway, so we proved really with nuclear power that you could make an impact. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that instead of one power plant, one nuke, at Davis-Besse, there would have been 4 or 6. There were 6 or 8 planned at Perry, east of Cleveland. Now, I have to say that Ohio is remarkable in its meteorological and geological distinctions here. We are the only, we have the only plant in Ohio, the only nuclear plant, that took a direct hit from a tornado. And we also have the only nuclear plant in the United States that was damaged by an earthquake. In 1986, I had the amazing experience of debating a woman from Cleveland Electric Illuminating, which has since morphed to Centuria, which is now mutated to First Energy. And I complimented her, because I had these news clippings, and I complimented her on having found an earthquake fault in Ohio to build a nuclear plant. And I commented, I grew up in Columbus, an earthquake, who knew from earthquake? And I said, probably in 10,000 years, when aliens come to a depopulated planet Earth, they will surmise that nuclear power plants were primitive markers for earthquake faults. And she said, oh, no. It's a geological anomaly. Got that? A geological anomaly. 3 days later, there was an earthquake that knocked out pipes, knocked out roads, and shattered various pieces of the Perry nuclear plant. The only place it's happened in the United States. Thankfully, the nuke was not operating at the time. But of course, CEI and NRC, this didn't bother them. And the governor at the time, Richard Celeste, the last living Democrat in Ohio, took the plant took them to federal court and said, well, here's a small thing. It's happened. We've had this earthquake and it's knocked out roads and you'll never evacuate. And the NRC said, hell with you, we're going to open it. And they went to federal court, and federal court said, same thing, and they opened the Perry plant. But there would have been 6 of them there. As a matter of fact, they built much of Unit 2 at Perry and then abandoned it, as they did at Seabrook, by the way. If you ever see pictures, the official picture of the Seabrook nuclear plant shows 2 sparkling white domes at Seabrook, right? But if you go to the actual nuclear plant, you'll see that one is not exactly sparkling, but it's white, and the other one is a rusted red piece of junk because they never finished it. And that's because we marched and we demonstrated and we got active. So now you've got this Davis-Besse thing here in Ohio, and it is, outside of this town, and it is actually world famous. Almost as famous as Maurice Claret, as a matter of fact. With about the same, we won't go into that. So, the fact of the matter is that there has not been, that we know of, a nuclear plant on this planet that has had a hole eaten right through its reactor pressure vessel head. This is astounding. This is unprecedented. Boric acid dripping on a 6-inch thick piece of metal, the thing that contains the massive radioactive core of this nuclear plant. This drip, this acid drip, which sometimes we all get after dinner, they had it for 6 years. And they kept the Nuclear Regulatory Commission out. And they allowed a jug-sized hole to be eaten through this thing that could have just blown. These graphics don't do it justice. I mean, you see these things and these fires. I was in Ukraine after Chernobyl, 10 years after Chernobyl. You cannot begin to describe what happened there. It is the apocalypse. That radiation spewing out into the countryside, getting into the bodies of children, passing through the placentas of pregnant women, contaminating the food, contaminating the water, contaminating the earth, killing everything. You cannot imagine the death and destruction that's involved. And what would have happened at Davis-Besse is worse, because that thing is older. The Chernobyl plant did not have anywhere near as much radiation in its core as Davis-Besse had, because Davis-Besse is an old plant. It hasn't operated that often, but it has plenty in there. And if that hole had gotten through that last little piece of shroud, a lot of you would not be alive. A lot of you would not be alive. And I had the shock of my life. I was at the University of Michigan. I was a senior editor of the University of Michigan Daily. I was the editorial director. I was the campus stringer for the United Press and for Time magazine. We had an AP machine in the building. And I was there in October of 1966. 7 years later, when we started with anti-nuclear stuff, I read a book called We Almost Lost Detroit. And it was about the near explosion, and Mike Keegan's here from Monroe, Michigan, actual native of Monroe, Michigan. And the nuclear plant, Fermi Unit 1 at Monroe, Michigan, in October of 1966 was on the brink of a major explosion that would have put a hole. This, you know, they say the nuclear plants can't explode, but that's the light water guys. They can explode, but that's a different story. But this one, the Fehring plant, was a fast breeder with liquid sodium. Had it gone, had it melted, it would have blown a hole. There would be no Mormon or Michigan. And the radiation, there would be no Toledo, Ohio for radiation, and all the way down Lake Erie. And I'm reading this book in the early 1970s. I'm saying, wait a minute, October 1966, I was 4 miles away. I was at the AP machine. I was the UPI correspondent in Time magazine. I never heard a word about this thing. Not a word. Now, how many of you heard a word about this dripping this hole in the head of Davis-Besse? Your lives were on the line. Every one of you could be dead if that thing had blown. No way, shape, or form would you have escaped. The radiation from 3 Mile Island, which I studied extensively, went 360 degrees. Most people think that, you know, there's a steady breeze from the west that would have blown to the east. It was blowing northwest at the time when the accident first happened, and it did a 360. Radiation from 3 Mile Island went everywhere. And when you hear them say that no one had died at 3 Mile Island, that is a lie. People were killed at 3 Mile Island, I guarantee it. There are 2,400 people from central Pennsylvania that have been trying to get into federal court since 1979 to get their cases heard about the damage, the radiation damage, the cancer, the leukemia, the birth defects, the stillbirths that happened after 3 Mile Island. They can't get into federal court. There's never been a federal trial about the damage done from the world's most best-known industrial accident up until Chernobyl. And these guys run around saying no one was killed at 3 Mile Island. It's never been tested in court. And I guarantee you, if you had been harmed by the radiation from an explosion at Davis-Besse, you would not get into federal court either, because these guys are protected. And let me tell you about how bad First Energy is in 2 minutes. First Energy is the inheritor of Cleveland Electric Illuminating, which tried to destroy the municipal light system, which was protected, thank goodness, by the great Dennis Kucinich, who was driven out of office. And, you know, the city of Cleveland was driven into default, and Dennis was made a laughingstock, and nobody told the story of what was really happening, which was the corporate bullies in Cleveland were blackmailing the city to force Dennis to sell them Muni Light, which he would not do. And so you have a municipal here in Bowling Green, which is one of the great luxuries in what's left of our democracy in this country, because you actually have the power, or some power, a say in your utility company. Imagine that. What a revolutionary concept. And you know, if you take a vote on your municipal utility, it actually happened in Sacramento. Sacramento had a municipal utility company. They made the mistake of building a nuclear plant. They took a vote and voted to shut the nuclear plant, and the next day it shut. Can you imagine? Most of the places, you know, if the people of Cleveland vote to shut down Davis-Besse or Perry, they'll blow it off. So this utility here has a double distinction. This First Energy, which is an abomination from the start. CEI was bad enough, then it got worse with Centurion, and now you have First Energy. You know, their slogan basically is, we don't care, we're deregulated, we don't have to. I mean, really, they are beyond the law, they are above the law. The reason that we're not having a definitive prosecution on these people for this blackout, which they caused, you know, Spencer Abraham is running around saying, well, we don't really know what caused the blackout. We know what caused the blackout. We know what caused the blackout an hour after it happened. First Energy does not know what the hell they're doing. And they are incompetent, and they caused the blackout. They blacked out 50 million people. You know what's going to happen to them? Nothing. You know why? Because Anthony Alexander, the president of First Energy, gave George W. Bush $100,000 for his inauguration. That's called a get-out-of-jail-free pass. Then they had a fundraiser in June for the Bush team with Dick Cheney president. They raised $600 grand. This company, in deregulation, now has a territory of 4.5 million people that they sell electricity to. And yet they're running a nuclear plant that they dropped a hole in the head. They took over Perry, which they have no idea what's going on there. Perry is on and again, off again, on again, off again. And it's still, by the way, on an earthquake fault. The earthquake fault, to my mind, well, let's hope it doesn't move. They also picked up 3 Mile Island Unit 2, which melted down in 1979, as I mentioned. And these companies are out of control. So we are now at a critical juncture in our democracy, as I think you all are aware. Never in the history of the United States has our democracy been more threatened and more under fire than it is right now. This is the most, and I say this as someone who has spent most of my professional life studying and writing about American history, this is the most dangerous time we have ever faced in the history of what's left of our democracy. And the one way that we can get it back is to stand up and have some victories. And your lives are on the line every day with Davis-Besse. That plant needs to stay shut. For your future, it must stay shut. And you can do it, and I'm almost done very quickly. Daryl Stockberger, your utility has taken the step of bringing in the first commercial-sized windmills in the state of Ohio. And Tomorrow I'm taking an 18-hour train ride to Minneapolis, and my third big trip up there. There's a guy in southwestern Minnesota who has figured out how to do one's own wind farm. And we now have sufficient wind power in northern Ohio with technological advances both in the size, and we now have bigger, slower windmills, basically, is what it is. And they've also figured out that there's more wind here than they thought originally, including in the lake. There's class 5 wind in the lake, which is really the best there is, and not far from the big cities. The long and short of it is we have sufficient wind power with available technology to supplant all the capacity that's been allegedly provided by Davis-Besse. They tell you, well, we need Davis-Besse for the power. Davis-Besse is shut. Are the lights on? I mean, are you getting heat? I mean, have we missed this thing? And the reality is that there would be thousands of jobs and millions of dollars poured into this economy in northern Ohio if that plant stays shut and we go to wind power. It is technically possible. It is financially necessary. And in terms of the public health, it is an absolute certainty. You must keep that plant shut. You can do it. Our democracy depends on it, and your lives depend on it. Thank you very, very much.